Here's your YouTube video introduction. It was just another cold evening in the busy streets of Los Angeles. People rushed past, lost in their own worlds, barely noticing the man sitting quietly on the sidewalk. His clothes were worn, his face weathered from years of hardship, but his eyes still carried a spark of hope. With a deep breath, he gathered the courage to do something he rarely did: ask for help. As he looked up, he saw a man walking by, dressed in casual but stylish clothing, his presence commanding attention even in the crowded street. The homeless man hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Excuse me, sir. Can you spare $1?" The man turned around, and that's when reality hit. The person standing before him wasn't just anyone. It was Sylvester Stallone, the legendary actor known for his roles in *Rocky* and *Rambo*. The homeless man's heart pounded. He had just asked for money from a Hollywood icon. Would Stallone even acknowledge him? Would he simply walk away like so many others had before? For a brief second, there was silence. Stallone studied the man, his expression unreadable. People around them had started to notice, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The homeless man, now feeling a mix of embarrassment and regret, lowered his gaze, preparing for rejection. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of walking away or handing over a quick dollar, Stallone did something that left everyone around them completely stunned. His response was nothing like what the homeless man, or anyone watching, could have predicted. What did he do? Did he ignore the man, offer him money, or say something that would change this moment forever? Stay with us, because what happens next is not just shocking. It's life-changing. Stallone didn't just walk away. He didn't reach into his pocket for $1 either. Instead, he crouched down slightly, meeting the man's eyes at his level. The noise of the street seemed to fade as people watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The homeless man shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect. He had asked for a simple $1, nothing more. But something about the way Stallone looked at him felt different. It wasn't pity. It wasn't annoyance. It was something else. "What's your name?" Stallone finally asked, his voice calm but firm. The homeless man hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had cared enough to ask. "Michael," he answered quietly. Stallone nodded, as if letting the name settle in his mind. "Michael," he repeated, "how did you end up here?" Michael glanced down at his hands, rough and cold from the evening air. He didn't like telling his story. Most people either judged him or didn't care enough to listen. But something about this moment made him want to answer. Maybe it was the way Stallone was looking at him, not as a problem, but as a person. "I lost my job a few years ago," Michael admitted. "Then my mom got sick. I spent everything I had trying to take care of her. When she passed, I had nothing left." His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly cleared his throat. "After that, things just got worse. One bad break after another, and here I am." Stallone listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some had probably walked past Michael before, never stopping to ask about his story. Now they were hearing it from him firsthand. A few moments passed in silence. Michael wondered if Stallone was about to give him a speech, something about working hard, pushing forward, never giving up. He had heard words like that before, but they didn't mean much when you were hungry and sleeping on the streets. But Stallone's next words weren't what anyone expected. "You remind me of someone," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Someone I used to know a long time ago." Michael frowned slightly. "Who?" Stallone let out a small breath, looking past the busy street as if seeing something only he could. "Me," he finally said. Michael's eyes widened slightly. The people around them leaned in closer. What did he mean by that? How could one of the biggest movie stars in the world possibly relate to a man struggling to survive? The air felt heavier now, the moment stretching with unspoken words. Everyone was waiting for Stallone to continue, but he didn't, at least not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It wasn't $1. It wasn't even money. It was something else entirely. And whatever it was about to change everything. Michael's eyes flickered to Stallone's hand, trying to make sense of what he was holding. It wasn't a dollar bill or a handful of loose change. Instead, it was a small folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, like it had been carried around for a long time. Stallone looked at it for a moment before extending it toward Michael. Confused, Michael hesitated before slowly reaching out. His fingers trembled slightly as he took it, unfolding it carefully. The writing inside was faded, but the words were clear. As his eyes moved across the page, he felt a strange mix of emotions rising in his chest. It was a note, a handwritten one, and it didn't take long to realize that it was something deeply personal. Michael swallowed hard and glanced up. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Stallone gave him a small, knowing smile. "A reminder," he said. "A reminder of where I came from." The crowd around them had grown silent. People who had once been in a hurry now stood frozen, captivated by the exchange. A few whispered among themselves, trying to guess what was happening. But Michael was too focused on Stallone to care about them. "You said I remind you of someone," Michael said, gripping the note tighter. "You meant yourself." Stallone nodded slowly. "A long time ago, before Rocky asterisk, before everything, I was in a bad place too. No money, no home, nothing but a dream that felt impossible." He exhaled, the weight of his past suddenly visible in his expression. "I was sleeping in a bus station, trying to figure out how to get my next meal. People looked right through me, like I didn't exist. I know what that feels like, Michael." Michael's chest tightened. He had never imagined someone like Stallone, one of the biggest stars in the world, had ever struggled the way he was struggling now. It didn't seem real. Stallone continued, his voice steady but filled with something deeper. "One day, I wrote myself a note. Just a few words to remind me to keep going, no matter how bad it got. I carried it with me every day. It kept me alive when I felt like giving up." Michael looked down at the paper in his hands again. He could almost feel the weight of Stallone's past in the ink. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was something personal, something real. "But why give this to me?" Michael asked. His voice was raw now, heavy with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. Stallone's eyes didn't waver. "Because someone once reminded me that I wasn't done fighting yet," he said. "And I think you need to hear that too." The streetlights flickered above them, casting a glow over the scene. The people watching seemed to fade into the background as Michael and Stallone locked eyes. There was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding that words couldn't fully capture. Michael's grip on the note tightened. For years, he'd been told that his story was over, that people like him didn't get second chances. But now, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure that was true anymore. And as he stood there, holding on to Stallone's past in his own hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that his own future had just started to change. Michael's fingers pressed against the worn edges of the note, his mind racing. The weight of Stallone's words hung in the air, heavier than the cold creeping into his bones. He had spent years believing his story was over, that he was just another forgotten soul in a city that never stopped moving. But now, standing face to face with a man who had once been in his shoes, he wasn't so sure anymore. The crowd around them had grown. People whispered, some still filming, others just watching in stunned silence. They had come expecting a simple moment. Maybe $1, maybe a kind word. But this was turning into something much bigger. Something they didn't quite understand yet. Michael's throat was dry. His voice felt smaller than before. "I don't know if I can keep fighting," he admitted, barely able to look Stallone in the eye. "I've tried. I really have. But nothing ever changes. Every time I think I've found a way out, something knocks me right back down." Stallone didn't answer right away. He studied Michael for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he reached into his jacket again. For a second, Michael thought he might finally pull out the money he had originally asked for. But instead, Stallone held out something even more unexpected. A small, crumpled business card. Michael hesitated before taking it, turning it over in his hands. It wasn't flashy or impressive. Just a simple name, a number, and a logo for something he didn't recognize. He glanced up, confused. "What is this?" Stallone's eyes were steady. "A chance." Michael's heart pounded. His fingers tightened around the card as he looked back down at it. The name wasn't one he recognized, but it carried an undeniable sense of importance. Something about it felt real. But there was also a catch. He knew that much. Nothing came easy in this world, especially not to people like him. "What does that mean?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Stallone took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "It means I've been where you are, Michael. And I know that sometimes all you need is for someone to believe in you. But I can't want it more than you do. If you're ready to fight for something better, make the call." The tension in the air was thick. The crowd barely breathed, hanging on every word. This wasn't just about a homeless man asking for $1 anymore. It was about something much bigger, a moment that could change everything. Michael swallowed hard, his gaze flickering between Stallone and the business card in his hand. The weight of his past, the pain of his struggles, it was all fighting against the small spark of hope that had suddenly ignited in his chest. For the first time in years, he had a choice. And now, everything depended on what he did next. Michael's grip tightened around the card, his mind spinning. A part of him wanted to believe this was real, that maybe, just maybe, life was finally giving him a way out. But another part, the one hardened by years of disappointment, whispered that this was too good to be true. He had been let down before. Why would this time be any different? His hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Stallone studied him carefully, waiting but not pressuring him. The choice was Michael's to make. The weight of it settled heavily in his chest. Then, just as he opened his mouth to say something, a voice cut through the moment. "Don't fall for it, man." Michael's head jerked up. A figure stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, another homeless man, someone Michael had seen around before. His name was Reggie, and he had been living on these streets even longer than Michael had. His face was lined with experience, his eyes sharp with skepticism. Reggie shook his head, staring at Stallone with a look of mistrust. "People like him don't save people like us," he said, voice edged with bitterness. "They just make promises they don't keep. You think he's different? Think again." The air grew thick with tension. Some in the crowd exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to believe. Michael felt a rush of emotions, anger, doubt, confusion. Reggie wasn't just some random guy trying to ruin the moment. He had lived this life too. He knew how the world worked. And part of Michael couldn't ignore the truth in his words. Stallone, however, remained calm. His expression didn't change as he turned to face Reggie. "I know it's hard to believe," he said evenly. "And I don't blame you for doubting me. But I've been there, man. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to feel invisible. Reggie let out a dry laugh. Yeah, and look at you now. You made it. But we won't. He gestured at Michael. This guy? He'll make that call, get his hopes up, and then life will chew him up and spit him right back onto this sidewalk. I'm just saving him the pain. Michael's stomach twisted. He looked back down at the card in his hand. It felt like it was burning into his skin, a reminder that he was standing at a crossroads. Stallone's words had ignited something in him, but Reggie's words fed the fear that had always lived in the back of his mind. For the first time since this moment began, he didn't know what to do. And just as he thought things couldn't get more complicated, Stallone did something that no one expected. He reached into his pocket again, but this time he didn't pull out another note or another business card. He pulled out something that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. A folded check. Reggie's eyes narrowed. The crowd leaned in. Michael's heart pounded. "What is that?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. Stallone met his gaze. "It's a decision," he said, "and it's yours to make." The city around them felt still, frozen in the weight of this moment. Michael wasn't sure if he was ready. He wasn't sure if he could trust this. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something much bigger. And whatever happened next would change everything. Michael's breath felt shallow as he stared at the folded check in Stallone's hand. It was right there, a chance away out, something he had never dared to believe could happen. But his fingers wouldn't move. His legs felt locked in place. The weight of Reggie's words still echoed in his head. Reggie let out a scoff, shaking his head. See, he doesn't even know what to do. That's how this world works. You dangle hope in front of a man who's been beaten down, and he freezes. Because deep down, he doesn't think he deserves it. His voice was sharp, but there was pain beneath it. And when he finally reaches for it, it's gone. Michael clenched his jaw. He wasn't sure if he was angry at Reggie for trying to talk him out of it, or angry at himself for feeling like maybe he was right. His whole life, every time something good had come along, it had slipped through his fingers. What if this was just another cruel trick? What if Stallone walked away and Michael was left exactly where he started? Stallone's voice cut through the storm of thoughts in his head. "Michael." Michael looked up. "I can't tell you what to do," Stallone said, his voice steady. "I can't force you to take this. But I will say this, if I had listened to the people who told me I would never make it, I wouldn't be standing here today." He took a breath, his expression softer now. The world is going to doubt you. People will tell you it's not worth trying. But at the end of the day, the only person who gets to decide if you give up or not is you. Michael's heart pounded. He looked at Reggie, who had gone quiet now. There was something in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe fear. Maybe he wasn't trying to stop Michael. Maybe he was just afraid of watching someone else take a risk he never could. Michael looked back at Stallone. Then, before he could let the fear take over, he reached out and took the check. The crowd murmured, the tension breaking all at once. But before Michael could even look at what was written on it, Stallone shook his head. "Don't cash it," he said. "Not yet." Michael frowned. "What?" Stallone gave him a small, knowing smile. "Meet me tomorrow. 9 a.m. address is on the back of that card." His voice was firm but kind. "If you show up, we'll talk about what happens next." Michael's stomach flipped. This wasn't just about money. Stallone was offering something else, something bigger. An opportunity, a real one. Reggie let out a low breath, turning away. Michael watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had spent so long believing nothing would change. But now as he stood there, check in one hand, business card in the other, he realized something. For the first time in years, the choice was his. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to make it. The city lights flickered above as Michael stood there, his fingers tightening around the check and the card. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed against him, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the weight of defeat. It was something else, something unfamiliar. Hope. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Michael found himself walking without thinking, his feet moving down the sidewalk, past the spots he had called home for so many nights. His mind replayed Stallone's words over and over. Asterisk, the only person who gets to decide if you give up or not is you, asterisk. That night, he barely slept. He held onto the business card like a lifeline, staring at the address scribbled on the back. 1,000 doubts ran through his head. What if this was all just another disappointment? What if tomorrow came and nothing changed? But there was another thought, quieter but stronger. Asterisk, what if this time is different, asterisk? By the time the sun rose, Michael had made his decision. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back. He was going to show up. At exactly 9 a.m., Michael stood outside a tall building, his heart hammering. The entrance was sleek, professional, nothing like the world he knew. He hesitated for just a second before stepping inside. A receptionist greeted him with a warm smile, as if she already knew he was coming. Within minutes, he was led to an office where Stallone was waiting. "Glad you made it," Stallone said, leaning back in his chair with a grin. Michael let out a nervous chuckle. "Wasn't sure if I would." Stallone nodded, understanding. "I get it. But you did. And that's what matters." He slid a folder across the desk. "This isn't charity, Michael. This is a job. A fresh start. You take it. You work for it. You earn it." Michael's fingers hovered over the folder. His throat tightened. It wasn't about the check anymore. It was about something much bigger: dignity, purpose, a second chance. With a deep breath, he picked it up. As he walked out of that office, stepping into the morning light, something inside him shifted. The street was the same. The world was the same. But for the first time in years, Michael wasn't the same. He had been given a chance. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away.